Hey guys, it's December 3rd, 2017. Going to do Q and A today instead of on Monday. So let's see here. Did off season was a topic today. So anything off season related, no contest prep questions. All right. All right, here we go. How fat do you allow yourself to get and clients to get? Is there a hard limit? If so, what is the limit? If not, what client specific markers or measurements do you look for to tell when it's time to pull back and for how long? Okay, so there's quite a few questions there, but it's all related. So there's no set limit. I don't say, okay, you only have two abs, so it's time for a mini cut, or you only have you have this much body fat, or you've gained this much weight over stage weight, or I don't really. There's really no reason to use any kind of marker like that. It's more so related to, at least the way I look at it would be fat to muscle gain ratio. So let's say someone's growing, they're growing well, then you start to notice that their the ratio of muscle to fat gain isn't very favorable anymore. That's probably indicative of insulin resistance to some extent. As far as markers go, I might actually check for insulin resistance. Just some basic blood glucose readings at the very least. Fasted a couple hours after meals, especially carbohydrate containing meals, and see, and maybe check it even for a few days or a week or a couple weeks or whatever. If they're not checking it regularly, look at the trend. Is it going up? Are they above, are they above something like, if they're above 90, if they're above 100, I might look into pulling back at that point. However, you also have to consider, are there other factors in there supplementation wise that might be raising their blood glucose, in which case that could skew things a little bit. But in general, that would be a way to tell, are they becoming insulin resistant. And let's see what else. All right, so how long would I pull back, or when would I pull back? So I would, like I said, when that ratio becomes poor, you're gaining more fat than you are muscle, it's probably time to pull back at that point. That's going to be totally different for everyone. I mean, I have people that they stay very, very lean. That's okay for them. They're productive in that state. They can stay healthy in that state. They grow well. Others, they actually need to gain a little bit more body fat before they kind of find their groove, if you will, where they feel better in that groove. They're stronger. Their training's more productive. Staying lean is good to an extent unless it's impeding performance. That's obviously not going to help you grow. So again, it's just totally dependent on the person. Like I said, once you see that ratio is getting out of whack and they're gaining more fat, then that's probably where you need to cut it off, or don't let it go much longer. Related, what are some of the usual mental and behavioral pitfalls you see clients who struggle with in the off season? Well, I mean, the biggest thing's obviously adherence, but why people don't adhere is totally, it can be totally different person to person. For some people, it's just a structure thing. They just don't have a plan. They don't have whether it's they don't have a coach, or they don't have the experience, or they just don't have a plan, or they just don't care, or whatever. It's normally just a structure thing. I mean, first and foremost, I think one of the biggest things I see with people is, unless the person has a really good handle on what's going on and they're very seasoned and they are very confident in what they're doing, let's say someone is working with a coach, and then after the show they drop it. They say, I'm just going to take a break. I'm just going to do this or do that. Well, that turns into a week, and then a month, and then they're fat 2 months after the show, or a month after the show, and they have to, they have a very poor starting point for their off season already. It's very discouraging, and it just snowballs from there. So structure is probably the biggest pitfall. getting right back to it after a show, having a plan, and if there are, relaxation periods, whatever that means for that person, maybe not directly after the show. If you're newer to this, it's probably not the best idea unless it's very strategic and you know exactly what you're doing. Maybe a little later on would be better. Just like I talk about people planning vacations for right after their show. They get done with their show and then they leave for vacation. It's a bad idea. You're looking for disaster at that point. And you think, oh, a week's not going to hurt, but for a lot of people that are average or, around average, it's if they overeat with a compromised metabolism, compromised hormones, compromised hunger hormones in their brain that cause them to binge. Yeah, I mean, you're surely going to do damage, and it's setting you up for a poor off season. So, yeah, structure, I would say, is probably the biggest pitfall. Behavioral stuff, I mean, that's all kind of the same thing. Just people having in their mind that a contest prep and an off season are different. They're not really that much different for most people. Like I always say to most people, the amount of food that you eat changes and your activity changes through probably, cardio. That's really it. If your off season and your prep are drastically different, then your off season is probably not that structured to begin with. It's if you're going from eating freely to right into a prep diet, quote unquote, then yeah, it's a drastic change. But if you're following a structured plan year round, it's a super easy transition. And the same goes from transitioning to prep to off season because you're used to it. It's easy. So definitely have that structure. Yeah. This person asked another question too, but I'm not going to go into all three of them because I'm already 7 minutes in, so I got to get some other people. Nice and easy question. What are your favorite calorie-dense foods to eat in the off-season? Okay, so somebody's eating a lot of food, digestion might be a little compromised just from, the point of food volume. The easiest one for a lot of people is probably the carbohydrates, eating, some processed carbohydrates. Most of the time, that's going to be the easiest thing to alter as far as, volume of oats or rice versus volume of, or potatoes, which can be super high volume, or volume of cereal or, I don't know, whatever else people want to eat. I mean, that's an easy one. Cereal's an easy one. Things like different kinds of granola bars, cereal bars, Rice Krispie treats, that's a popular one. Any kind of, if you're doing, lower fat carb sources, any kind of lower fat muffins and things like that are really easy. I mean, that's really easy to use. Obviously, as long as you're not just hammering sugar all day. But I would also say that fats probably play into it, just depending on the person. If they're eating higher fats, then you might want to transition into a little more oils, especially things like coconut oil or just pure MCT oil if fats are getting really high and that's slowing digestion. Because obviously if you're eating all really complex, dense fats, like saturated fats that take longer to break down, from meats, it's not necessarily a bad thing. You might even be using quality meats like grass-fed meats, but they're taking a very long time to break down and digest, so a little bit easier fat would be something like an oil. I didn't mention protein, but obviously like whey isolate would be probably the easiest to break down. Okay. Your take on starting off season with a reverse diet or a recovery diet, getting suppressed hormones back to healthy points. So basically they're asking how quickly would I want to push things back up. And this again is person dependent. And the reason I say that is more from a psychological standpoint. I think at this point it's pretty much established through some science and some just observational evidence that getting back to baseline as far as calories go, as far as getting your body fat back up to a better spot, in terms of being healthy, is probably better for most people. However, there's the psychological aspect of that. So if that's going to cause someone a lot of psychological issues, then I might have to take a slower approach. And I just have to let that person know, hey, this might impede your hormonal recovery and your metabolic recovery a little bit, make it a little bit slower, but you're more comfortable with this situation. It's easier mentally for you to do. So as long as they're okay with that and they understand, then I don't, it's okay. We're still getting from point A to point B. It's just taking a little bit more time. So again, kind of person dependent, but for most people, first off, if I can get their calories back up to a decent spot without a lot, without too much fat gain, then we're doing a pretty good job. Get glycogen filled back out, get their metabolic rate back up. I think that for most people, if we're very diligent with it and very, we're detailed and we're keeping an eye on insulin sensitivity, then can usually get their metabolic rate back up to baseline without having to regain all of the fat again. But again, some people might need that body fat for hormonal purposes, especially natural athletes that are trying to recover their menstrual cycle or recover their testosterone levels. They might need some of that fat gain. So, you kind of look at the person, see what their situation is. Are they natural? Are they enhanced? What are their tendencies like? And then mentally, what can they handle? Adherence is the biggest thing. It doesn't matter if you have the best reverse diet. If they can't adhere to it, it's not really going to make any difference. If it makes them depressed and anxious and all those other things, then, that's also not good. So how many cheat or refeeds do you allow clients in the off season? Okay, well, a cheat and a refeed are gonna be a little bit different. I'm assuming you just mean a meal off the plan. In which case, I would say again, it's person dependent. I mean, most people if they're in a very modest calorie surplus during the week, they're just in enough surplus to grow steadily, not gain too much body fat, not become insulin resistant. They're not piling on weight super fast, but they are gaining some weight. They can afford to have a free meal each week. It's usually not a problem with most people as long as it's controlled. They're replacing one of their meals during the week with a free meal. It's normally not an issue. And this is a meal. It's not a feast. It's not a binge. It's a meal. That's more calorie dense than what they're normally eating, but still, again, it's one meal. Now with that being said, I do have people that I have eating 2 free meals a week, just because their calories are super high already. I mean, I have a few people that their calories get very, very high. We're talking 30 times their lean body mass in calories or more, which is huge. That's a ton of food for, depending on the person's size. But I would have them eat maybe an additional free meal each week. It's just as a spike, or a whole spike day. I would have them spike at that point for just calories. That's it. I mean, that's all that's going on there. I'm still having them eat things that are digestive, friendly to their GI tract, that they're not going to get super inflamed from. But yeah, I mean, there are cases where I'll have more than one. And someone could have more than one and still stay lean, even with a normal metabolism. They would just have to have less of a calorie surplus the rest of the week. I would say not. I mean, usually I don't have anyone eat really more than 2. I have in really short-term stints. I would say, we're talking just short situations. I might have had someone eat a daily free meal. That's not very often. It's people that are just absolutely murdering food and we just can't get any more calories in. And there's actually another question on here about force feeding, so I'll kind of touch on that, and why that might be not such a good thing. Okay, when do you know when it's time to do a mini cut? I kind of answered that question above. Like I said, when ratio of muscle to fat gain is not favorable, you're gaining more fat than you are muscle, or just as much fat as you are muscle. Insulin sensitivity goes down, looking at fat storage and fat distribution, looking at blood glucose levels, our fasting blood glucose levels rising, our post meal blood glucose levels rising. So, I mean, those are the easiest way. That is the easiest way to look at things. There's other signs of insulin resistance as well, like the pumps in the gym aren't very good. Looking a little bit flatter, not as full, like not as many nutrients partitioned into the tissue and keeping it full, maybe more subcutaneous fluids, so things like that. But in general, the first two I mentioned are the easiest ways to gauge that. Do you have to force feed to grow? Will it cause a lot of inflammation and in the body just not being in a good state, if that makes sense? No, you don't have to force feed to grow, but I do think that in short stints, you can get away with it and it could be beneficial. But even then, force feeding doesn't necessarily mean that your calorie surplus is huge. It just means force feeding more food than what your GI tract can handle. So I'm someone that I keep my calorie surplus pretty modest, but I've had periods where I'm still only gaining a little bit, but I'm having to eat so much food that it almost feels like force feeding. Appetite's low. GI tract is very edgy. It's hard to keep my digestion good. So that's kind of force feeding, basically. But I mean, I'm not getting fat from it. Now, it's definitely not a good thing, especially in the long run. Yeah, you're going to cause inflammation. You could disrupt gut flora. I mean, you could do basically anything that could go wrong with your GI tracts could pretty much happen. And not only that, but absorption issues. If you're not absorbing the nutrients, then obviously that's not super useful. So I would say no, it's not a good thing. In the short run, if you're getting into that force feeding, territory, you can probably get away with it, but when your body starts really fighting back at you, you're probably going to have to stop. And there's no reason to keep pushing into that because, yeah, there will be inflammation, absorption will be poor, it could be water retention. Training performance won't be that good, in which case it's kind of defeats the purpose anyhow. You're going to feel like crap and really sluggish in the gym as well. So, yeah, not going to be good in the long run. That's why off seasons have to go in waves. You might have to do mini cut in the off season, and if you have to, then do it. You might have to do it to resensitize. You might have to do a digestive deload, if you will. Might have to implement fasting days, or at least partial fasting days, where that you kind of are in that force feeding territory. So you have to implement those partial fasting days to give your GI a rest, let the inflammation come down. Supplementation for digestion, gastric emptying, getting that food, in and out as quick as you can. So, I mean, there's a lot of things to consider, but no, in the long run, that's definitely bad. In short run, it might potentially be useful. Okie dokie. Let's see here. I think there's one. All right. All right. Dealing with food intolerances, specifically protein sources. So that's a tricky one, obviously, because a lot of people eat the normal chicken, maybe turkey, fish, beef, eggs, egg whites, stuff like that. So on occasion, I mean, there are certain sources that can form intolerances. You can be allergic. I mean, you could technically be allergic to just about anything, but some are less common than others. I mean, having a food allergy towards chicken, I can't say that I've ever actually seen it with any clients. Not that it couldn't happen, but some foods are considered hypoallergenic. I mean, not really gonna have issues with those. But rotating, I mean, easiest thing is rotating food sources. If you're not allergic to the food source and you just have an intolerance, meaning it just causes a little bit of GI upset. Um, you might have you know could even have a little bit of inflammation, a little bit of fluid retention, things like that. Kind of maybe mess with if you have skin problems, make those flare up, things like that. You might not want to use it at all. It's not to say that you can't use it in very small amounts, or if it's just something that you eat all the time. Normally, the foods that people are more often allergic to are kind of the foods that also pop up as intolerances with overeating them. So things like egg whites, for example, that's a possible allergen. A food that some people can be allergic to, more so than chicken. So if you eat it constantly over and over, 2-3 times a day or whatever, yeah, you might form a food intolerance with it. Give it a break. Don't eat it for a while, then reintroduce it in less frequency, and you'll probably be all right. Same thing with, I mean, like I said, any food that's commonly known for allergies. It doesn't have. I'm not just saying specifically protein sources. There's a lot of things like that. Peanut butter, just nuts in general. There's a ton of different foods, but yeah, it's just if you have issues with it every single time you eat it, I wouldn't mess with it. I would rotate to different food sources. There's so many different food sources to eat. There's so many different types of meats to eat. There's so many different types of other protein sources that aren't meat sources. There are a lot. You might have to get a little crafty and kind of broaden your horizons a little bit. But if it's something, like I said, if it's something that you formed an intolerance to because you've overeaten it, then give it a rest and reintroduce it later. All right, let's see. Has excessive fat intake ever fucked up your digestion? Say 120 to 160 grams per day. I seem to always be gassy and bloated and was wondering if gallbladder was not handling the fat load as well as it once was. So, yes. Obviously, high fat intake can do a couple things. It slows down digestion because fats digest slower would be the obvious one, but also the organs that digest the fats might not be able to produce the raw materials, digestive materials to digest them. So gallbladder could be part of it. Even your bile acid from your liver can be part of it. I notice that people that don't digest fats very well, if I'm going to try to add more fats, I would do it very slowly to let the bile acids increase naturally, hopefully, or even add bile acids to the diet or to the supplementation protocol or something that increases them. D-limonene is a really good cheap supplement. Jarrow makes that. There's a couple companies that make it. Jarrow makes a good one. They're 1,000 milligrams per capsule. I've posted about this stuff before. I can put in, 1,000 milligrams with my main fat meals or someone's main fat meals during the day, and they, normally don't have issues that way. You could even do something stronger, like an actual bile salt, like Tutka, would also potentially be pretty helpful. Ox bile, things like that would be potentially helpful, or just lowering fat intake. I know obviously if someone's eating a lot of fat, that's what they have to do to get their calories in, then yeah, that's not ideal, but you might have to give it a little rest. But there's a few supplements there that can support fat digestion. And then obviously using fat sources that are easily digestible, MCTs, coconut oil, oils in general, etc. I talked about that a little bit ago in the Q and A. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. You can try adding other things into the diet, a little bit more protein, a little bit less fat. Just see how it goes. See what digests better and what ratios. Training, this last one, guys. So training frequency for maximum growth in lean tissue in the off season. More rest days. I'm not sure if that's a separate question, but as far as training frequency goes, I think total volume seems to be the biggest thing, for a muscle group. There's a lot of researchers out there that talk about training and have done a lot of research on training, like Brad Schoenfeld, for example, somebody like that. There's a lot of research. It seems like frequency became pretty popular. You're doing the really high frequency training, and there is merit in that. But at the end of the day, if you're taking a body part, take the total volume for that body part and split it up however works best for you. If you're doing, especially if it's a big body part, if you're doing legs 3 times a week, not like 3 full workouts a week, but three times a week, you're actually contracting the fibers, you're hitting them, you're doing exercises for your lower body. I would say, yeah, you might want to split that up. Why? Just because you're not going to recover very well if you just blast the shit out of them with 30 sets in one day. You might recover better in short little stints, and you're still hitting the total volume. So I would say, like I said, split up the total volume however works best for you personally in terms of recovery. Frequency can be useful in that regard, but it's still not going to outweigh the actual volume that you're using. So it's the biggest one to remember. All right, guys, we're at 26 minutes, so a little longer today, but I think I got them all. So I'll talk to you guys next week.